welcome back once again to the Imaginary Gallery. It's TJ, your host. This is the last video on the making of an abusive man. I'll be referencing Lundy Bancroft's Why Does He Do That Inside the Minds of Angry and Controlling Men. I'm going to cover the cultural excuse as well as abuse as a form of oppression, and I've got a few of my own little things to throw in there too. Mr. Bancroft tells us that his abusive clients sometimes learn these very things we've discussed, like in the previous video talking about adult films and websites and stuff like that. Previously it was movies. When I read those, I was thinking that I doubt a person went to a movie and became abusive. So to make it like a direct cause and effect relationship may be erroneous. I think what Bancroft is trying to say is that there are many different things that do or can contribute to an abusive person and the way they obtain their attitudes towards abuse. But for the cultural excuse, the clients learn these things about the ways the society may shape their views, such as the things we covered. They will stick by their abusive habits, and they will seize this knowledge as a brand new excuse for their violence. If they came to Bancroft and admitted that they punched their date out in the face, in the olden days they would have said,
"Oh, I hit her because I was drunk."
Or,
"I only abused her because I was abused as a child."
Now they've gotten more sophisticated, and they rise to a new level of sophistication in the act and the art of escaping responsibility, which is the Cluster B Monster's favorite game. They'll declare,
"I did it because I learned entitled expectations, and I learned about the devaluing of women."
Bancroft says that when he hears that kind of crap, he responds by telling this person that he's putting old wine in a brand new bottle. The number one lesson you seem to have learned, he says, is how to make more excuses for your abusive behavior towards women. And I see that you're still practicing it. That's a good one. The abusive people do need to learn about social influences, but Bancroft says, not in a manner that gives them yet another means to excuse themselves and get themselves off the hook.
"Yeah, I beat your daughter, but only because when I was a child I was beaten."
And another thing with this, it's common for an abusive person or a Cluster B person to blame others. Not necessarily blame another person, blame it on a situation. Well, because I was in that situation, well, that's why I abuse you. And they want you to just get over it. One thing I've learned is when, let's say, you are the target of such abuse, if you were to stop that person and say, "How could you do that? That's abusive," you would expect a caring and understanding person to stop, become shocked, and think, "Oh my goodness, I was abusive." Well, if you have a Cluster B monster, that will never happen. Instead, you'll hear the excuses like we heard a moment ago.
"Well, it's not my fault. I watched too many movies as a kid."
"It's not my fault. My daddy abused us."
When you hear such statements, it's a clue that the person is making the excuses because it doesn't want to have to change the behavior. So it's not going to cave in and break down and say, "Oh dear, you're right, I did abuse you. Oh, let me go fix it." No, it'll be, "You deserved it," or "You forced me to do it," or "It's that movie I watched, it's its fault," or whatever they want to say. Take that as your cue to exit. Don't buy it if you hear that crap. Next part is abuse as a form of oppression. If there is a home where the lady is abused, he tells us it's a small-scale model of much larger oppressive systems that work in strangely similar ways. Many of the excuses that abusive men will use for verbally tearing the partner to shreds can be the same ones that an overzealous or power-hungry boss might use for humiliating his or her employees. The abusive man's ability to convince himself that his domination of you is for the good of your relationship and for your own good, and it's paralleled by the dictator who will say,
"People in this country are too primitive for democracy."
The divide and conquer strategies used by abusive people are reminiscent of a corporate head who tries to break the labor union by giving certain groups of workers favored treatment. And now it's interesting where he covers the fact that these things we've covered are not the only things that might cause someone to become an abusive person. Bancroft is stating, therefore, that the making of an abusive person is not necessarily restricted to the specific values of the society that they teach him about men's relationship with ladies, but without realizing it, he may be applying attitudes and tactics from other forms of oppression that he's seen throughout his life or witnessed as a boy or as a young adult. And he may have learned to admire such things and therefore uses it to justify his behavior. And he gives an example that if you think about an oppressive organization or a system that could be like a racist country club or a military government, you're going to find the same types of behaviors and justifications by the powerful people like he has described previously. The tactics of control, the intimidation of victims who try to protest, the undermining of efforts at independence, negative distortions about victims in order to cast blame upon them, the careful cultivation of the public image of the oppressors, all are present, along with many other parallels. Those in power generally tell lies while simultaneously working hard to silence the voices of the people who are being dominated and to stop them from thinking, just as an abusive person strives to do that same thing. And the bottom line is the same. Oppressive systems stay in existence because the people in power enjoy the luxury of their position, and they become unwilling to give up these privileges that they've won through taking advantage of other people and keeping them down. In short, the abusive mentality is the mentality of oppression. Now, the connection among different kinds of power abuses can add greatly to the stress experienced by the abused lady. If you already face discrimination, for example, if you're a woman of color, or if you're poor, or if you're a lesbian, you may feel overwhelmed at times by sometimes when you're interacting with your partner, it behaves in the same manner as someone who's like against lesbian. We're not going to serve someone like you in here. You're terrible. And then he tells us that some abusive men will deliberately take advantage of their partner's social vulnerabilities. For example, he said he's had many clients whose partners are undocumented immigrants, and they've threatened them, saying, I'm going to have you deported, as a form of control. So they can beat up the spouse, and then when the spouse says, I'm going to call the police, then he can say, don't you dare. If you call the police, I'll tell them you're illegal. And so she'll be like, okay, no, I won't. And then she has to endure more abuse. She probably feels helpless because he's there, she's there because of him, but he's turned into a monster, and she's helpless to say anything about it because then she might be deported. Now, maybe being deported is the answer for her, but it's doubtful someone would want to be deported against their will, and at the expense of revealing abuse. He tells us you can find supportive services for specific groups of abused women, including immigrants or lesbians, or locate agencies where there are staff people from your background who understand the additional challenges that you face. Bancroft provides kind of a summary stating when you step back and gaze upon the broad panorama of social influences on a boy's development, we can see that it's no great wonder that he may learn patterns of abuse somewhere in his experience. What he doesn't get taught by a cultural message that support abusive women, he might learn from the tactics of another abusive person that he knows, and from also blaming victims. In fact, the greater surprise is that so many boys do not grow up to be abusive towards the ladies. So he says there must not be anything inherently abusive or power-hungry about all men, or it would be impossible for so many to refuse to follow that path where their cultural training is compelling them to be abusive. One of the best-known male crusaders against the abuse of women is a man who he's had the good fortune to work with. Grew up in a home where his mother was physically beaten. He could have modeled himself after the father, but he didn't. He chose instead to think critically about the experience and to take the opposite road. He says many influential leaders of the movement against the abuse of women in the U.S. and Canada and other countries are male, including men who have mentored him in his work. So the oppressive mentality can be taken apart and replaced with a new consciousness. He says the composer of Amazing Grace was a slave trader who repented of his cruelty and became an abolitionist. Abusive men can learn respect and equality if we insist that they do so, but they won't make those changes unless they are subjected to tremendous pressure, because their cultural values as well as their privileges are pushing them very hard to remain the same. There's never been a better time than now to apply the pressure, to demand abusive people accept the responsibility for the destruction they're causing. And he says we live in a period of mounting international pressure for the respect of human rights for everybody, insisting on the recognition of worth and dignity in every person, male or female, young or old, wealthy or poor, or whatever else, reptilian. The current context is probably the most helpful one there's ever been for putting an end to the abuse of women, and to the range of abuses of power that follow its pattern. Resistance never disappears. It waits in the shadows, sometimes for many years, and then eventually sprouts its ugly head again. You may have gone through dark times when you felt, I just can't fight this anymore. I give up. Yet you rebound after a while to try again to recover your rights. And one day, he says, you will succeed. As usual, Bancroft ends this section with some key points to remember. An abuser is not born. It's made. In order to bring about change in an abusive person, we have to reshape its attitude towards power and exploitation. Abusive behavior is reinforced by multiple societal messages, some of which are specific to the abuse of women, and some of which reflect an overall culture of oppression. Your courageous resistance to partner abuse, and you have stood up for yourself and your children in many ways, whether you realize it or not, is a gift to everyone, because all forms of abuse are intertwined.
I am the Narcopath.
I've got a little secret for you. It's one of my secrets of success. Since I'm giving you all these confessions, figured I might as well give this one. I know, from what I heard through the grapevine, you had such a horrible time after you realized I had left you, or, as the books I've been reading say, discarded you. I like that better anyway. You were just devastated. You said so many things to me that I wrote them down because I'd never think to say such things, but I'm going to use them next time someone tries to dump me when they figure me out. But I'm going to give you one of my secrets. It's worth millions. I've learned there's something called first impressions. I know that first impressions can be very strong, so I use that to my advantage. Remember, when we first met, I was agreeable to anything and everything as long as you wanted to do it. I went along to your sickening country music concerts that I pretended to like, and even bought those cowboy boots. Well, I stole them, but stole those cowboy boots just so I'd look like I fit in. And all the other things I did for you, like doing your dishes every night. I know you didn't ask me to, but it's part of the game I play, because I knew how much you hated to do dishes, so I figured, well, I'll show you. I'll do them for you, because my goal was to try to show you that your life is nothing without me. Meaning, anything I could sense that you needed done or wanted done, before you could snap your fingers, I had it done. Because, like I said, first impression. I did so much for you in those first few weeks, things your own family wouldn't do for you, and it was for a reason. You questioned sometimes if I was really wanting to do all that for you, and the answer was, yes, this is just who I am. Which was a lie, but it got me through. I was exhausting myself. Of course, I'd never show it. I had to come on strong, because I know how the people are of today. They don't care about anybody else, just like I don't care about anybody else. But I needed something out of you. You had the money. You had the home. I was homeless. You were the one. I just pretended to be like you for as long as I could. And I know sometimes I can get a long time to do that, because I'm a master at manipulation. When you caught on to the fact that you knew I couldn't stand country music and found out that I was just doing all that for you, tried to accuse me of being a fake, and I just said, oh honey, that's silly. I wanted to learn to listen to the music. I wanted to like it because you did. And I gave you stupid excuses. And evidently you bought them, because you sure kept me around for a while.
Now I know I've dated way more people than you are. I don't know if dated's the right word, but you know what I mean. First impressions. I made sure to be your dream come true. Anything and everything. So many things that a normal person didn't have such interest in. I was the exception. I was made for you. So I convinced you that I was your soulmate. I told you that the first date, and you tried to question me, saying, oh, that's not possible to feel that way so quickly.
Like, well, that's just how I am. Oh, I've never done this with anyone else before. Which was a huge lie. It works every time, usually. You were giving me a hard time about it. I wanted you just to fall for it. It started making me have to work more. So I figured, well, you're gonna get it when I learned your insecurities. Typically, on my dates, they figure out something I did, and I just make up my stories usually, but sometimes they find video evidence, reliable witnesses that I try to destroy, and I try to discredit. But if it's your friend 20 years, and I step along after a few days and say, oh, that person's no good for you, they're lying, who are you going to believe? So many times they believe the other one. So the reason why I am so effective is because even with your anger at what you think you found out about me, eventually you tried to dump me. And I reminded you of all those things I had done for you, and you thought about it, and like clockwork, you were wanting to try to work things out just a day or two later. Bingo for me. The reason this worked is because I did my homework. I did my beginning stages correctly. No one had ever made you feel as beautiful as I did, because I knew exactly what your weaknesses were. So when you thought you were just a little overweight, I made sure to mention how, wow, you're looking slim tonight, even though you didn't. But it really made you happy. See, I know these things. These are my secrets. And those things go really deep. So even if I did something that upset you, which I had an explanation for, you might not have believed, I knew I would stay in your mind and haunt you because of the first impression. Nothing negative happened then because, well, I was too new for you. You hadn't had enough time with me. Then it was my fault for asking you to spend every day and night with me that you started to notice stuff. And damn, that always happens. But I need to make sure I'm with you every moment of the day so you don't find someone else who's real. Does it make sense now?
Are those
Pussy Willows, Dottie.
my
Remember that?
Fabergé egg? Ah!
Speaking of Pussy Willow, how about mine? Or, AKA my Virginia? You told me it was so hot and so tight and you loved it.
Well, honey, I figured you should know. You had no idea what else had been in there.
Sometimes when I was with you and your tongue was in there, I'd had a whole football team in there. You wonder why it tasted kind of salty, because I make it a habit of keeping everything inside.
And I don't do protection. I won't. If it's not raw, it's not going to happen. That's my rule. But I know one time it looked like syrup was spilling down my thighs, and I just told you, well, I'm excited because you're so hot. I didn't know how to explain that one, but I think that one worked. You smiled, and you got a little bit more excited. I do what I have to do, and I have to improvise sometimes. You wish you were me. You'll never be me.